Hello and welcome to the latest episode of JRock's Pop Culture Revolution. This is episode number 20, and this is going to be a really special one. Um, for this episode, we're going to be talking about the fact that 2026 marks the 50th anniversary of one of my all-time favorite classic TV shows. I'm, of course, talking about The Jeffersons. Now, let's get into it. Now, as I said, um, in 2026, The Jeffersons, which premiered on CBS on January 18th, 1975, is celebrating its 50th anniversary. Wow. It's hard to believe, I sure do feel old because, I'm just 4 years older than the Jeffersons classic TV show. Wow. So let's really get into this. Now, the show was on for a total of 11 seasons, and it featured 253 episodes. Wow. Oh, wow. Now, I tell you, just in prepping for tonight's episode, I had taped some rerun episodes that were on earlier today while it was work. And this is something I commonly do every day because I work during the day and I love to come home and watch a lot of these reruns that I taped, off of like Antenna TV and stuff like that. And the Jeffersons, one of the things I regularly tape, and I either watch some of these old episodes, like before I go to bed at night as I'm eating dinner, or even on the weekend. I record so many of these rerun episodes that I almost got like a whole season worth of these episodes that I have to watch, and you're like, wow, you're watching old episodes of a TV show that's premiered 50 years ago. Well, yeah, I mean it's that good of a show, and even though I've seen these episodes, I dare say I've seen them over and over, and I probably a couple hundred times, within my lifetime. And and no matter how many times I see each and every one of these episodes of the Jeffersons, I laughed. I enjoyed just as much as the first time when I originally watched these episodes. And what's funny is, at this point in life, when I've seen these episodes so many times, I mean, I can almost, I almost know word for word, you know, I can quote the script, what's going to be said next. And yet, these episodes and what I'm watching in these episodes of Jefferson is just as funny as the first time I see it. Wow. And that's how you know when a show is really good, that if you can watch it over and over. I mean, a lot of times, people say, okay, I've seen this, I'm sick of this, but they just don't make classic TV shows like they used to. I'm just sorry to say, I find myself constantly going and watching these old, what's considered pop culture now, these old classic TV shows, not just of the Jeffersons, but of stuff like, Happy Days, Alice, Family Ties, All in the Family, just to name a few. Laverne and Shirley. Again, this is stuff that I grew up with, but again, I enjoy watching these old episodes just as much as ever. It remains such a big part of my life, and I watch these and I have fond memories of experience the stuff when I was a kid, and it's still a big part of my life. It means a lot to me. So, um, okay, let's get in now. Of course, the Jeffersons was created by Norman Lear, and of course, the Jeffersons was a spinoff of another classic Norman Lear TV show, which was, of course, All in the Family. And of course, the Jeffersons is, based kind of around the life of George and Louise Jefferson as they move up financially and socially. Now, of course, when we first encountered the Jeffersons, it was on All in the Family. They were Edith and Archie's neighbors. Now, when we first encountered the Jeffersons, we didn't meet George Jefferson right away. And the reason for that, from what I understand, is actor Sherman Hemsley, who played George, who got the part of George Jefferson, he was busy. He was busy starring in a New York play on Broadway. And Norman Lear, that's where Norman Lear had first discovered Sherman Hemsley, and he'd approached him about the part of George Jefferson, but he was under contract, so he was not going to be able to do the part for at least another 6 months to a year. And and Norman Lear thought he was so good that he just thought he'd make the perfect George Jefferson that he was willing to wait. So what Norman Lear initially did was he thought, okay, we're going to kind of test the Jeffersons on All in the Family. So the Jeffersons first did appear on All in the Family. Then they became regular cast members. Now, of course, first we didn't really. George Jefferson was only a character that was mentioned. In fact, Isabel Sanford as Louise Jefferson, her and Mike Evans as the Jefferson son Lionel, they first appeared as the Jeffersons on All in the Family. And from time to time, you'd hear references about Lionel's father, George, but we never really seen him. We just kind of built up the character of George without ever, very much kind of like what they did with the character of, Vera on Cheers, Norm's wife Vera, who we heard all these crazy things, and people kind of had their own vision of what Vera must have looked and been like. But that was another, Cheers years later. But they kind of did something similar with, George when the Jeffersons first appeared on All in the Family. We only heard of George. We never really seen him. And in the meantime, they brought in another character, another actor to play the role of Henry Jefferson, who was George's younger brother that was living in the house with the Jeffersons. And so since George Jefferson couldn't, Sherman Hemsley couldn't appear on screen until after he finished doing the play, and his contract ran out, they got this other actor to play George's brother Henry. And oddly enough, once Sherman Hemsley came on, was able to appear on All in the Family as George Jefferson, we see him for the first time, and sparks flew immediately between Archie and George, and they had a lot in common, although they were polar opposites. I mean, one is black and one is white, but there's a lot of racial tension between Archie and George, and I guess the biggest thing trying to figure out is who was the bigger bigot, George or Archie. Now, I mean, take your pick, right? But there's so much conflict between George and Archie, and it made for a lot of great comedic laughs, So that's where we first seen the Jeffersons was All in the Family. And of course, eventually, the Jeffersons became such popular kind of side characters All in the Family that Norman Lear got the bright idea to give them their own spin-off series. So from what I understand, that originally Isabel Sanford was kind of nervous about leaving the safety net of All in the Family and having a spin-off show. She was like, well, what if it's not successful? But it turned out to be a very successful series. And so what we got to remember about the Jeffersons, first appearing on All in the Family is when they appeared on All in the Family, they were living next door to Archie and Edith Bunker. They were living in Queens, New York at the time. And of course, so as George Jefferson becomes a very successful business man, he's in the dry cleaning business. I think at this point he owns like 4 or 5 cleaning stores, and by the end of the Jeffersons, he series, he opens up like a total of 7 dry cleaning stores, and of course, so once Sherman Hemsley starts playing the role of George, they no longer need the character of Henry Jefferson. He's written out because now Sherman Hemsley's there, and he's in a lot more scenes. And actually, Isabel Sanford, who started out as the kind of leading lady as far as the Jeffersons on All in the Family, once Sherman Hemsley came aboard, they were both like a really big part of George and Wheezy. I mean, together they were comedic, just a great comedy team, if you know what I mean. And however, once they launched the Jeffersons TV series, they of course had to make something a little different. So at this point, the Jeffersons, as that spins off into its own show, it's basically about the life of Louise and George and their Jefferson and their son Lionel, their only son, um, moving on up. They live in Queens, and then they're moving on up to a luxury high-rise apartment in Manhattan. And of course, there's all kinds of different experiences and things for them to deal with. Because of course, like in one of the first episodes of Jefferson, we learned that years ago, when they weren't so wealthy and doing so well, and they were just kind of middle class folk, um, Louise used to make a living by being a maid. In one of the first episodes of the Jeffersons, as they're moving on up, George wants to hire a maid so that Louise can have an easier life and doesn't have to do clean the house and everything. And it's a new kind of life for them because no longer the middle class folk that they once were. They're really moving on up, and they're living in this new luxurious high rise, Manhattan apartment. I mean, they've gone from being middle class to it's a really different type of life for them, and that's what a lot of the Jeffersons was because George Jefferson went from being a struggling businessman to very successful, and now he can give his wife and his son the finer things in life, and he has no shame about it. Whereas Louise has a lot more trouble struggling with their new place in life as far as living in a better place. Louise, in one of the first episodes, like when George wants to hire a maid, one of her friends wants to be the maid, and she wants to hire a friend as a maid, but she doesn't. She feels funny about giving her friend a job as a maid, and her friend's like, "Well, hey, hell, I need a job." So what are you talking about? Um, don't feel funny, and she's like, "Well, I used to be a maid," and so, George really is enjoying the finer things in life now, and he has no shame, he has no qualms about enjoying the finer things in life. And the thing of it is Louise is kind of struggling with all of a sudden going from being middle class folk to money not really being a problem. And she kind of struggles with that for a while. But then eventually, of course, by the end of the series, um, Louise is kind of, learns to adjust to that now her and George are able to afford the better things in life, the finer things in life, and money's not really an issue anymore. But money is an issue in the sense that even though George is a very successful businessman, he's got like a lot of men. He's driven by success. He's driven by money, and he's very ambitious. Even though he's kind of made it in the business world, as far as being a successful dry cleaner, made a ton of money. He's got this great new high rise apartment, and he can pretty much do whatever he wants. He can afford anything pretty much at this point in life, but it's still not enough for George. He's still striving for more money. He'd do anything to make a buck. He's one of those type of guys. But I think at the end of the day, he's just loving life because as we hear him in all the episodes, pretty much talk about how he struggled for most of his life and he's finally made it and he's able to pretty much do whatever he wants. And there's no shame in that. There's also no shame in the fact that he's very proud that he went from being a very poor person in life to now being one of not even a middle class family, but upper class family. He's moving up on the social ladder. He's he's no longer opening doors, so to speak, for other people there. And then that's another funny thing about the Jeffersons. They have a white doorman, Ralph, who's always got his hands out and trying to do anything even for a quarter. So again, the Jeffersons is just one of these great landmark TV shows. Big part of my life, I will tell you that. Now, let's talk about some of the characters, okay, here. George Jefferson, of course, who I've been talking about, played by actor Sherman Hemsley. Let's talk about the character of George, because he's pretty much like I described. He's loud, he's ambitious, he's loudmouth. He's a dry cleaner. He's a successful businessman. He's wealthy, and he moves his family from Queens, New York, um, to a luxurious high-rise Manhattan apartment. Okay, Louise Wheezy Jefferson is George's patient, moral-centered, warm-hearted wife who is often the voice of reason. Whenever her and George are in an argument of some kind, it's usually because she's trying to get him to do the right thing. And deep down, George is a good guy, but very ambitious, and sometimes his ambition gets the best of him, and is thrive to be more successful, more rich, kind of sometimes clouds his judgment. And Louise, or as he lovingly refers to her as Wheezy, um, and Sherman Hemsley said that's something he kind of created. He's I'll just call her Wheezy. It's easier to remember, but kind of one of those things that Louise Jefferson becomes Wheezy, and a lot of times it's just kind of his loving name for her, but it's one of those. It's almost kind of like a catchphrase. So even I think most people that have ever seen the Jeffersons, if I say Wheezy, you know who I'm talking about. But yeah, she was a moral higher authority as far as between her and George. Again, she was always kind of the only one that could really calm George down. They went at it, round and round because they were both kind of pigheaded, and they both thought they always were right. But more times than not, Louise was the one that was again, she always kind of knew what the right thing to do was, and she was the only one that could really get George to do the right thing. She's the only one that he would ever really listen to, and they would go argue and go back and forth. But she always found a way to get George to do the right thing. Okay, now let's talk about some other characters. Okay, Lionel Jefferson, the only son of George and Louise Jefferson, who is a little more progressive and thoughtful than his parents. Now again, when we initially see the Jeffersons, which was initially Isabel Sanford as Louise Jefferson and Mike Evans on All in the Family as Lionel Jefferson, they were the ones that would appear in the bunker house, and they would be having Louise and Lionel would interact with both Edith and Archie Bunker, and a lot of times the Lionel character, I really loved Lionel when he appeared on All in the Family originally because he was very much a liberal as far as the character, and he'd interact also with Archie's kind of meathead son-in-law, played by Rob Reiner, and his wife Gloria, of course, played by Sally Struthers, and of course Archie would say things that were not racially correct, and Lionel had fun kind of cracking jokes with Archie, and it was a real breakout character. But sadly, when the Jeffersons launched, because of the star power of Isabel Sanford and Sherman Hemsley, Mike Evans' character of Lionel kind of got pushed to the side. He was in a lot of the scenes, of course, being the only son of George and Louise, but he did not. What he discovered is he did not have as much screen time as he did on All in the Family, and so eventually that left Mike Evans to eventually leave the Jeffersons, and he would return for a couple seasons, but he was replaced by another actor, Damon Evans. Oddly enough, had the same last name, but they were not related. And interesting thing about this was this is something they used to do on TV back in the day, where where one actor would leave the show, but they were very quiet about it. They didn't even tell you, when the new actor came on and started playing, Damon Evans started playing the role of Lionel Jefferson. You just kind of seen it on the screen. Oh, who's that? That's not Mike Evans. It's a different actor, and kind of knew it, but they didn't even announce it or anything. It was just kind of, okay, this is the new Lionel, and this is just the way it is. You're gonna have to accept it, like it or not. But again, Even once Damon Evans came on, Lionel wasn't in a lot of the scenes. I mean, he had his role kind of diminished as the series went on. Um, kind of sad, but and also once the Jeffersons series launched, it should be noted that Lionel Jefferson, he had also like his father George, he struggled with their new place in life, climbing the social ladder. Um, Lionel Jefferson, like I said, in All in the Family, started out very much of a progressive um, liberal Democrat. That's what the character was. Um, and yet, when the Jeffersons are moving up the social ladder, they're in the new luxurious high-rise apartment. Lionel is kind of enjoying the Jeffersons' new wealth and place, climbing the social ladder, very much like his father. And in fact, another episode I remember watching just recently where um, Lionel wants to help his girlfriend Ginny get on a political committee, and he asks his father, "Hey, what's the best way to get on a committee if you want?" And George tells him, "Hey, well, find out who's the head of the committee and not offer him a bribe, but give him a contribution. You call it a political contribution, son." And Lionel does this, and another episode I remember where Lionel's doing, he's not getting along with one of his college professors. He thinks the college professor is picking on him. And so George, out of love, as a loving father, wants, because now that he can afford to do this for his son, he buys his son a term paper. Everybody else finds out about this. Louise and Jenny and the Willises and Louise, everybody gets upset that Lionel is using this term paper that his father bought for him, and everybody's getting on Lionel's back. And again, if you saw the original, Lionel on the Family, this is something that the original Lionel would not have done. But the character kind of takes this attitude change. As maybe something like that would really happen in real life, if somebody goes from being kind of just poor to middle class family to now they can afford anything and they're living the good life. So maybe it was one of those natural kind of transitions. But that was another interesting thing about the character of Lionel Jefferson. Now we had Tom and Helen Willis, the Jeffersons' neighbors, who were an interracial couple who were married, which was a groundbreaking thing at the time. And here's the thing, Norman Lear, because if you go back to All in the Family, that was pretty much the first classic TV show that Norman Lear really was a part of. And all these other shows kind of, such as the Jeffersons, and other, Good Times and even Sanford and some that Norman Lear was involved with, and Maude, all these other shows spun off basically of All in the Family. And it's amazing that Norman Lear had that kind of success, but he did, and so at the time, when they're launching the Jeffersons and the Jeffersons is becoming its own series, um, I don't really, because if you look at what Norman Lear did with All in the Family, very controversial. It was very political, a lot of racial stuff going on in All in the Family. And that was really controversial at the time. That was something very new to the TV landscape. And so with the Jeffersons, Norman Lear very much continued on uh, with having those type of themes in his shows. And again, I don't think he did it like a lot of TV shows and movie studios do now. Well, okay, well, we got to have we got to have an interracial couple. I think he did it because he thought it would be controversial. He thought it would get people talking. I don't think it was really any kind of virtue signaling, but um, it made for great writing. It made for great storytelling, and so again, I think that was a very is another important aspect of the Jeffersons. And what's interesting is I remember, I think on the Jeffersons, when we see Tom and Helen Willis kiss for the very first time, again, the world was a very different place back in 1975. And so that got a little bit of a response from people, you know, negative and positive, you know, so there you go. But, you know, these are things that were just starting to be talked about on TV back in 1975, you know, as the Jeffersons is launching. Um, Now let's talk about the Jeffersons theme song, Moving On Up. Now, that song was performed by none other than Jana Dubois, who first found fame as Walona Woods on Good Times. And again, besides Norman Lear, okay, um, there's another Good Times connection, believe it or not, to the Jeffersons. Mike Evans, who originally played the role of Lionel Jefferson, he was actually a co-creator of Good Times. And that was another reason that he eventually left the Jeffersons, because Good Times had become so successful that he was working on, you know, behind the scenes and helping to develop Good Times, and that had a huge part to do why he left the Jeffersons. I mean, there were other reasons, but that was a big part of it, you know. And it's interesting because growing up watching Good Times, I did not realize at the time that he was a co-creator of Good Times. But knowing this now, it kind of makes sense that the character of Michael Evans was obviously a character of Norman Lear, named after the actual Mike Evans who played Lionel Jefferson. Interesting. How many of you knew that fact, huh? Okay. And the thing about the theme song, I got to tell you, I remember always watching the Jeffersons, even to this day. That theme song, you know, comes on, I start singing it, start dancing, you know, getting down, and man, I just love the sound of that song. So upbeat, so happy. And here's the thing, okay? So the theme song, it centers around the core ideas of the show, which is pride, success, and progress. You know, and that's why they call it moving on up. You know, man, I just don't know what to say. But the theme song was a big part of the show, and I tell you, every time it comes on, um, same thing with like Good Times. Same thing with like the Flintstones. When these classic TV shows on, that's how I know it's a great show. It's got a great kick-ass theme song that you can just sing along to. Man, you got it made. I mean, the entertainment starting right away, from the start of a theme song, and then you even today when I tape some of these classic reruns, you know, I start singing the theme song, and then fast forwarding through the commercials. You know, wow. I mean, modern technology in this, you know, looking back on some of these retro great pop culture shows, man. I mean, life just doesn't get any better than that, you know. So the Jeffersons was a TV show that had huge historical and cultural significance for the following reasons. One of the first TV shows to focus on a wealthy Black family. In fact, I mean, when most people think, I mean, you know, George Jefferson came years before Cliff Huxtable, you know, on the Cosby Show. So let's give credit where credit is due. Um, and I was reading that Sherman Hemsley, when he was approached about playing the role of George Jefferson, initially what he told Norman Lear is that he would only take the part if George Jefferson was successful, because he didn't want to play another stereotypical poor Black man on TV, you know, showing another case of Black poverty. So he's like, let's make this character of George Jefferson a little different. Let's make him successful, okay? And so that was, you know, and Norman Lear wanted Sherman Hemsley for the role of George Jefferson. So I think that had a lot to do with George Jefferson becoming the character that he ultimately became, you know. So again, I think, you know, the Jeffersons, they picked all the right people to play the, you know, they were cast in the right parts, you know, characters were writing. It was just a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful show. Okay, and it dealt with race, race relations, racism. Um, it dealt with homophobia, believe it or not, gun control. I remember one episode where I think the Jeffersons been and some of the neighbors were broken into in their high-rise apartment, and so George was nervous. He got a gun. He wanted to protect his family, and of course, in this particular episode, um, their granddaughter Jessica gets a hold of the gun accidentally, of course. Luckily, nobody gets hurt, but she shoots the gun and it goes off, and George realizes what a mistake he made getting the gun. And so this is one of the first episodes of any classic TV show where you see a situation like this where, thank God, things didn't go. The little girl didn't kill herself or somebody else, but could have been seriously injured. It is just a TV show, folks, but they're trying to teach us a lesson, about not having guns around kids and stuff, or if you do, at least have it locked up, right? And so George, of course, by the end of the episodes, he apologizes to his daughter-in-law Jenny for what almost happened. He promised to get rid of it. He promised Louise and Jenny he's going to get rid of the gun and then never do anything like this. And it was a tough lesson, but he learned his lesson. So again, we get these kind of lessons with these classic TV shows. It dealt with Black upward mobility, class tension, marriage dynamics. Always seen George and Louise and even the Willises fighting back and forth, but as a typical married family does, right? Or a couple does. So nothing that too out of ordinary, Sherman Hemsley, like I said, he wanted George to be a successful businessman, and so that's why again the character worked. I think Sherman Hemsley had a lot to do with developing the character of George Jefferson. And so that's that. And the Jeffersons, I gotta say, celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. As you can tell, I'm a big fan. So I thought the fact that I'm only 4 years older than the Jeffersons, that when I read the Jeffersons was turning 50 years old, I thought, wow, okay, we got to do an episode on this. And folks, in the pop culture revolution show, as we often do from time to time, this is not going to be the only episode, I'm sure, but we do have the Jeffersons. We'll probably revisit some of the old episodes, or we do some future episodes on the Jeffersons. I'm sure, talking about some of the characters. There's so much. Even though the show premiered 50 years ago, it's still a big part of my life. I mean, like I said, before doing an episode tonight, I was just watching 3 episodes before I did this episode to kind of get myself in the mindset to do this. So it's been a real fun episode. I hope you enjoyed watching the latest episode of JRock's Pop Culture Revolution. This has been episode number 20. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye for now.